So let's take a look at some recent findings. There was a book that was recently published in 2011, and by Antonio Luque Hernandez. And it contains some of the old records of Tenerife, some of the earliest families of Los Rianos and the surrounding region. It gives unique insight to these families listed, and I got some help from a research person by the name of Jose Marrero from Tenerife, and we conversed quite a bit.
What kind of stuff do they have in there?
So let's talk a little bit about that. So she ends up with a person's name at the end of her research of Gonzalo Dominguez. Ms. Bertha runs out of time and resources and decides to stop there, publishes her book in 2004, providing a wealth of knowledge, right? And that's kind of what I've shown today. I take the name Gonzalo Dominguez. I'm very curious about that, and nothing comes up, right? Just in standard sources that I'm using, until we get this book. And it turns out it uses these old documents, and here's a couple of copies of pages that are civil records, transactions, something where people were listing family members, either due to a land sale, maybe there was some kind of marriage, and they were getting married within in a courthouse of some sort. I don't quite understand where all of the references are coming from. I do have a name, and I have a year, and I have a list of information that happened in that year in that particular town of this particular, what would be like a justice of peace, or what we would consider like maybe a clerk of courts or something, where they wrote down these civil transactions happened, and they were amongst these people here, and in them they say sometimes, here were their children, here were their parents, or he was married too. And so that's very useful. Turns out he took these records here and produced an entire book of them. What we determine is, searching through, there is a Gonzalo Dominguez, and I'm going to call him Gonzalo Dominguez Gonzalez, okay? Just for reference. We see a civil record in 1626 where it lists here Marie Diaz married to a Gonzalo Dominguez in that reference. Interesting. So we have a list of a Gonzalo Dominguez married to a Marie Diaz, right? In the same town, in that same time frame. We also see a civil record in 1621 showing the sons of Sebastian Gonzalez and Maria de Paiva, or de Paiva, depending on how they spelled it. And Gonzalo Domingo is listed as one of them. The question is Domingo the same as Dominguez in this case? And then I go a little further, and we determine in 1624, Sebastian Gonzalez writes a will and testament, whose wife is Maria de Paiva, and it lists him as Gonzalo Dominguez. Big question is this our same Gonzalo? The island's population in 1770 was roughly about 7,700 people. It had actually been declining because of the economy over the last 50 to 100 years on the island, and they actually documented from 1750 to 1770 the population declining. It was around 7,700 people in the census records. To give you some reference, all of South Louisiana at the time in 1788 census shows free people of being somewhere around 15,000. So half of the free people, not including slaves, of Louisiana's population, all of South Louisiana in 1788, half that number were living in Tenerife. So you think, well, you do some research on your Canary Island line, and you look in the Diocese of Baton Rouge church records, and you see a certain Juan Dominguez. And then there's another Juan Dominguez that shows up in that same town having children in 1788, 1778. What are the odds that this is the same Juan in your research? Could there be two Juans and one just didn't show up in the list? Yes. What are the odds that are two Gonzalo Dominguezes within the exact same community, not a very big community, that there are a Gonzalo Dominguez that is the son of Sebastian, and there's a Gonzalo Dominguez married to a Maria Diaz? If we make this connection here, knowing that the population sizes are what they were, we might be able to infer that these are the same people And this is the same Gonzalo Dominguez that's listed in Bertha's research. So at this point, I have to make a concise argument and say, I'm going to support this as being the same person, and I'm going to continue my research until I can prove it without a shadow of a doubt, which may not ever happen, right? But I also have to use a lot of intellect and say, given the size of these communities, given the population sizes, and given the same thing we do here when we look at old records from 1778, 1780, 1785, and say, well, clearly there cannot be two of these people here. He's the only one that shows up in this community in all these records. It must be the same guy. I know it's dangerous to make that assumption, but I'm going to say, entertain me for a while and assume this is the same person. You leave here today and you don't assume this is the same person. I'm okay with that. But at least I wanted to show you what we have found. The ages make sense. The places make sense. So I'll leave it at that. So let's entertain me for a while and say, yeah, I believe Mr. Wade up here, and he's got the same guy. Okay, great. So we take it from here. In 1620, we look at Sebastian Gonzalez, and there's a civil record whose mother is Volonte de Paiva, whose wife is Maria de Paiva. Now we have a mother of Sebastian Gonzalez. We also see Manuel Dominguez, a civil listing, where he lists parents as Gonzalo Dominguez and Violante de Paiva. In other words, this Manuel might be one of the brothers of Sebastian. And so now we have a Volonte de Paiva married to a Gonzalo Dominguez. So we go even further. Now we have our original Gonzalo Dominguez married, whose father is Sebastian. Seems like he... And so, and I also want to bring you back to this point. How do we know it's Gonzalo Dominguez since Sebastian Gonzalez doesn't even carry his surname? That was not uncommon at all. Not uncommon. Sometimes they would miss an entire generation before that surname passed down. We don't understand that in the States. After the 18th century, it seems all people carried the same surname as the father. But in the Canaries, this was not something that was uncommon at all. And most people who've done research on Spanish surnames in the Canaries know this. So I'm not too surprised at this point, Gonzalo Dominguez is the son of Sebastian Gonzalez. Guess what? His father was a Dominguez. That makes me even believe more so that we have the right person. Because they used the surname, it's very possible he used the surname for his son's last name. The grandfather and the son have the same surname in a very small community. We look up Gonzalo Dominguez at this point, married to Violante de Paiva, and my researcher finds that there's a will and testament of a Gonzalo Dominguez who married a Violante de Paiva in Riello. In 1577, he writes his will and testament. And in it, he mentions he's the son of George Dominguez and Magdalena Perez of Vazelas, Guimarães, Portugal. Portugal. When I was doing some of this Dominguez research a year ago, there's a person in Lafayette named George Rodrigue. Anybody know who that is? He painted the Blue Dog. And I uncovered some history after he died that his wife did on his surname. Rodriguez, Dominguez. Well, there's a lot of similarity, I always thought. Interesting, you know. Must be Canary Island or Spanish of some sort. His family came to New Orleans in the 1800s, not through Canary Island, not Isleño at all, from Portugal.
Canada.
But it had a Portuguese, and yes, Canada first, but it was originally...
He was Portuguese.
And I thought, Portuguese? What a strange place. I never would have thought that. I don't know why I didn't think that. Of course, the Canaries, you guys don't know, originally were settled by Portuguese and still have quite a bit of Portuguese influence, including their accents. This is not unbelievable that the name Dominguez may actually be from Portugal. Portuguese. And so I wanted to share that with you today because this is about as far as we've got. So as of the will and testament of Gonzalo Dominguez, dated 1577, he states he's the son of George Dominguez. And if you entertain me on the thoughts that we have presented on the research today, it's very likely you have Portuguese ancestry. This is where the town and the community reside in Portugal. It turns out this city is historically associated with the foundation of Portugal itself. They're one of the settlements that precedes the foundation of Portugal, and its role in the foundation of the country. It's known as the cradle of Portuguese nationality. It turns out in 1128, it was a major political and military events lead to its independence. All right.
Is the red spot on the map?
Yes, sir.
That's basically a Celtic area also.
A little bit further north, but yes, you're right. Galicia. Which I'm not going to even imagine if we're Gaelic already. So, a few pictures of that town in Portugal. It is an ancient Roman town. A lot of still of ancient Roman ruins, including a Roman festival on the top right that they celebrate in that town, celebrating Roman heritage. And the full length, all the way from George down to Manuel.